Hi everyone, welcome back to my class. This is Romana Ali. I hope you all are doing well. In the last session, we have seen the different types of nervous systems like central nervous system as well as peripheral nervous system. We know that in both the systems, a lot of nervous tissues are present, right? So in the central nervous system, cell bodies are found in clusters. We know that a number of nerve cells are present in both the systems. So the cell body of the neurons, the cell body of the nerve cells, when they are grouped together, that too in the central nervous system, then that cell bodies forms a grey matter, and that grey matter, so the nervous tissues are found in both peripheral nervous system as well as in the central nervous system. In the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord is present. So in the brain, a lot of nerve cells are present. Likewise, in the spinal cord also you can find a lot of nervous tissues. That nerve cells or the neurons contain cell body as well as the nerve fibers, the extension called axons. So the cell body, when they combine, when they group together, they form the grey matter of the brain as well as the spinal cord, and the axons, when they combine together, when they group together, then it forms the white matter of both brain as well as the spinal cord. Now let us see what are the different terms that we can use to call the group of axons and the group of cell bodies in central nervous system as well as in peripheral nervous system. We know that central nervous system shows brain as well as spinal cord. So when you see the cell bodies that are found in these two parts, then they forms a cluster, that means group. So that group of cell bodies can be termed as nuclei. You need to remember all these terms so that you can understand later topics of our class. Next one is small collections of cell bodies in peripheral nervous system. How the cell bodies of the neurons are present in the central nervous system, likewise in the peripheral nervous system also you can find the cluster of cell bodies, and that can be called as ganglia. So the cluster of cell bodies in the central nervous system is nuclei, and the cluster of cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system, that is PNS, we call them as ganglia. Now, the bundle of nerve fibers. Nerve fibers are nothing but the extensions which are arising from the cell body. What do we call that extensions? That is nothing but our axons. So, nerve fibers are our axons. When they forms a bundle in our central nervous system and running through the central nervous system, then we call that bundle of nerve fibers as tracts. And when you see that bundle of nerve fibers running through the peripheral nervous system, then that can be termed as nerves. So basically 4 different terms are given here: nuclei, ganglia, tracts and nerves. Nuclei, group of cell bodies in CNS, group of cell bodies in PNS are called as ganglia. Next one is bundle of nerve fibers running through CNS called tracts, bundle of nerve fibers running through PNS are called as nerves. I hope all these 4 terms are clear to you. Let us see the section of spinal cord. We know that this is our brain, and this medulla oblongata, when it shows the extension, this is our spinal cord, and it is covered with a vertebral. It is protected by the vertebral column. When you do the section cutting of this spinal cord, okay, so when you do the section cutting of this spinal cord, then after the section cutting of the spinal cord, you can see this kind of structure. So this is a section of our spinal cord. When you look at the parts that are found in the spinal cord, then they are neurons. Many neurons are present in our spinal cord. So the cell bodies of the neurons which are found in the spinal cord, they group together and they forms the grey matter of our spinal cord. Besides this grey matter, the axons that are extending from the cell bodies, all that axons forms the white matter of the spinal cord. So basically the spinal cord shows the presence of the neurons, the cell bodies forms the grey matter, and the axons, which are also called as nerve fibers, they forms the white matter of our spinal cord. Now, the spinal cord shows you the 2 main sides. One is ventral side and the other one is dorsal side. Dorsal side of the spinal cord is termed as dorsal horn. The grey matter, only the grey matter of the spinal cord shows you the two zones. One which is towards the dorsal side, which faces towards the dorsal side, we call that horn, that structure as dorsal horn, and the other part which is facing towards the ventral side, we call this as ventral horn. Two matters are found, grey matter and white matter. Grey matter shows you the two main parts, a dorsal horn and ventral horn. Now we'll see how the neurons are transmitting the signal from the PNS, that is from the peripheral nervous system, to the central nervous system, and then how the central nervous system is sending command to the PNS in order to show an action. Now firstly we will discuss about the spinal nerves. So we'll take one example to understand about the topic spinal nerves. So when for example, on our hand, if any insect sits, then what happens? How you can sense that any insect is sitting on your hand and how you show your response, your action. Let us see that. So when any insect sits on your hand, here the sensory neurons are present. Sensory neurons are always pseudo-unipolar neurons. So these pseudo-unipolar neurons, they carry the information to the dorsal side, to the dorsal horn of our spinal cord. When the information is carried by the sensory neurons are always pseudo-unipolar neurons, okay. So when the information is sensed and it carried by the sensory neuron to the dorsal horn of our spinal cord, then what happens? From the dorsal side, dorsal horn, all the axons, the group of axons, they reaches the main part of our central nervous system, that is our brain. When the sensory neurons reaches the brain, at the time some other neurons are found in our brain and we call that neurons as interneuron. Interneurons are also called as association nerves. These interneurons or association nerves are the nerves that are found in our brain and they are responsible to analyze the information sent by the sensory neuron. After the information gets analyzed, this information is given to the motor neurons. Some command or the instruction by the brain is given to the other neurons and we call that neurons as motor neurons. So here the motor neurons, the axons, they are passing through the spinal cord. When they pass through the spinal cord, they reaches the ventral horn of the spinal cord. Sensory neurons, they send the information to the dorsal horn, but the motor neurons, they give the command to the ventral horn. When it reaches the ventral horn, at the time these motor neurons are then transmitted to the muscles in order to show some action. Whether you hit that insect with another hand or you throw that insect, right? So in this way, the different actions can be shown by the different persons based on the information carried by the brain through the neurons called motor neurons. Always you need to remember one point, that sensory neurons reaches the dorsal horn of our spinal cord and motor neurons reaches the ventral horn of our spinal cord. And the motor neurons, these motor neurons are the multipolar neurons. So once the information is sensed by the sensory neurons, it is analyzed by the interneurons and the command is sent by the motor neurons. Motor neurons are always multipolar neurons and sensory neurons are always pseudo-unipolar neurons. Okay. Now, just before we have seen that the group of nerve fibers, group of axons that are passing through the central nervous system, we call them as tract. So here this group of axons of the sensory neurons can be termed as ascending tract, that is passing through the spinal cord and reaching the brain, and the group of axons that are passing through the spinal cord, the group of motor neurons. The group of motor neurons, it shows the nerve fibers, and that nerve fibers, they are grouping, they forms a cluster, and we call that cluster as descending tract. So the cluster of the sensory neurons are called as ascending tract, and the cluster that is passing through the central nervous system of the motor neuron axon, we call them as descending tract. These are the different things that you need to remember in order to learn about the spinal nerves. Now we'll come to the topic. Here sensory nerves are present and motor neurons are also present. They are packed. They are present together in a form of nerve. So this nerve that shows you the presence of all the neurons, sensory as well as the motor neurons. We call this nerve as spinal nerve. And spinal nerves are present in pairs. From here the sensory neurons are travelling, from this part also the sensory neurons travels and reaches the dorsal side. And here the motor neurons, they are reaching the ventral side and they send the motor neurons to both the sides in pairs. So always the spinal nerves, they are found in pairs. They are present in pairs. So how many pairs of the spinal nerves are found in our body? They are 31 pairs of spinal nerves that are found in the human body. And as the nerve, spinal nerve shows the presence of both sensory neuron and motor neuron in them, we call this nerve as mixed nerve. So here the dorsal horn and the ventral horn of the spinal cord is present. The sensory neurons, they move towards the dorsal side, and the motor neurons, they always move towards the ventral horn of the spinal cord. The motor neurons that are found in our ventral root, we call the motor neurons that are found in groups in the ventral root of the spinal cord, that forms a structure called ventral root. And the sensory neurons that are grouped together in the dorsal horn of our spinal cord, we call that as dorsal root. And dorsal root is a structure that shows the group of cell bodies. Some extensions of the cell bodies can be seen in the neurons that are found in the dorsal horn. So we call them as dorsal root ganglia. Just before, in the beginning of the class, I told you that the group of cell bodies that are found in the central nervous system, we call that group of cell bodies as ganglia. So here in the spinal cord, in the dorsal root of the spinal cord, ganglia can be seen. So this is how the spinal nerves are formed by the combination of both sensory neurons and the motor neurons. Here from the dorsal root the sensory neurons are arising, and from the ventral root the motor neurons are coming. They both forms a common nerve. So they are present in a common nerve, and we call that nerve as spinal nerve. 31 pairs of spinal nerves are found in the human body, and in each nerve you can find the presence of mixed nerves. So in the spinal nerve, the mixed nerves are present. Let us talk about the topic reflex action. Reflex action means the sudden response based on the stimuli that is provided. The sudden response that can be shown by our body, we call that actions or response as reflex action. Now what happens in the reflex actions? Let us see. So this is a leg of a person. If any person or a doctor hit at the knee of a person's leg with a hammer, then the neurons which are present, the sensory neurons which are present in its leg, it will go to the dorsal side, dorsal horn of our spinal cord. When the sensory neurons reaches the dorsal horn of our spinal cord, then from there it usually used to go to the brain. But here during the reflex actions it would not happen. The sensory neurons will not travel to the brain. Instead, they will be analyzed by the interneurons in the spinal cord itself. So here when the sensory neurons reaches, when the sensory neuron sends the change, now the interneurons are present. These interneurons analyze the information that is carried by the sensory neurons, and then after the analysis of the information by the interneurons, the motor neurons send the commands to our muscles. They send the commands to the muscles of our leg in order to show some action. Your knee may show a jerk. As soon as the person hits on your knee with the hammer, reflex action can be seen, and that reflex action is a jerk in your knee. You will pull your knee forward with a jerk. So this kind of reaction can be termed as knee jerk reflex. This is a particular example that is given in your syllabus, knee jerk reflex. We can take other examples also to show the reflex action. For example, if you touch any hot object, then the sensory neurons will move to the dorsal part of the spinal cord, dorsal horn of the spinal cord. There the interneurons are also present. They will analyze the information then and there itself, and the motor neurons carry the command to the muscles in order to remove the hand from that hot object. This is how the reflex actions, reflex responses can be provided by the different neurons. And here the receptors are also present. When you hit the knee of a person with a hammer, the receptors, they will sense, and that can be taken, that information can be taken by the sensory neurons. In this way, during the reflex action, the sensory neurons will not take the information into the brain. Instead, the sensory neurons, they will take the information, and that information is analyzed by the interneurons in the spinal cord itself, and then the motor neurons get the command, and that command is going to be transmitted to the muscle cells in order to show the reflex action. This is the mechanism. This is how the reflex action can be seen in some situations, and here we have taken the example of knee jerk reflex. Let us see the structure of our eye. Whenever you see the structure of our eye, you will be finding 3 layers in our eye, and that 3 layers are, one is fibrous cord, which is made up of collagen fibers, the other one is vascular cord, and the third layer is retina. So the first layer, fibrous cord, shows you the 2 main layers in it, and that are sclera, and the other part is cornea. These 2 parts forms the uppermost layer, that is fibrous cord. The next one is vascular cord. Vascular cord shows the presence of ciliary muscles or ciliary bodies, we can say. And in the vesicular cord, you can also find a layer called choroid layer. Right? One is the sclera, which is the outermost layer, and that forms a fibrous cord. And below the sclera, you will be finding one more layer, and that layer is called as choroid layer, and this choroid layer forms our vascular cord. And beside this choroid layer, that means below the choroid layer, one more layer is found in our eye, and that is our retina. So in the vascular cord, at the end of the choroid layer, some muscles are present which attaches to the lens of our eye. We call that muscles as ciliary bodies. Here you need to remember that 3 layers of our eye are fibrous cord, vascular cord, and retina. What are the different parts and the layers or the structure which are found in our eye? That we will discuss now. Let us see the different parts that are found in the human eye. Just before we have seen that 3 different layers are found, right? So now we'll look at the different parts that are found in our eye. When you look at the eye, then it will show you the white color part. That white color part is our sclera. The layer sclera forms the white part of our eye. And in the center, you can find a ball, black color ball. That ball is called as iris, and in the center, you will be finding a hole-like, black hole-like structure. We call that hole as pupil. Iris and pupil are the parts that are covered by a transparent part again, and that transparent part which is covering iris and pupil, we call that part as cornea. Now, when we see the side view, just to understand the internal structure of our eye, then these parts will be, this is our cornea, that is a transparent part. Next, this is the colored part, of our eye, which will be either brown, blue or black in color, and we call that part as iris. In the center of the iris, one hole is present through which the light enters, and we call that hole as pupil. Now behind the iris, lens is found. Okay, these are the different parts that you can see. Now we'll see the layers. I told you that the outermost layer is our sclera. Below the sclera, you can find a bluish colored layer, and that layer is named as choroid layer. In the choroid layer, melanin is found, due to which it is blue in color. Okay. Now, after the choroid layer, one of the inner and important layer of our eye is retina. So, the third layer is retina. When you see the sclera, it forms a 360 degree of angle. And even the choroid layer. When you see the choroid layer, which is the second layer, here it is attaching to the lens. It is attaching to the lens of our eye with the help of some muscles called ciliary muscles, or we can call them as ciliary bodies. So, ciliary muscles are present that helps to attach this choroid layer with that of our lens. The next layer is our retina. So, retina is a layer which is also bluish in color due to the presence of melanin, and this retina is a layer which shows 3 sublayers in its structure. When we enlarge the structure of retina, then it will be like this. Here, if this is a layer retina, you can find 3 sublayers, and that are, one shows you the presence of neurons in it, the other layers shows the presence of bipolar neurons, and the third layer shows you the presence of different kinds of cells like rods and cones. So, here we will see the enlarged structure of retina to understand it in a more better way. So, in the layer retina, you can find 3 sublayers. One shows you the presence of ganglionic cells. The other layer shows you the presence of bipolar neurons. And the last layer shows you the presence, the innermost layer shows you the presence of different cells, and we call these cells as photoreceptors. So, photoreceptors are of 2 types, rods and cones. We will discuss about rods and cones later, but here you need to remember that 3 different sublayers in the layer retina can be found. One shows you the presence of ganglionic cells, that means the neurons are found. The other one shows you the presence of bipolar neurons, and the innermost one shows the photoreceptors. Photoreceptors are of 2 types, rods and cones. All these things are found in the layer retina. So, it is an important layer. And 2 more things that are found in the layer retina are, one region is called as black spot. This black spot is a spot found in the layer retina through which the light cannot pass, will not help in the vision of any image. So, black spot is found in the retina. If the light falls on the black spot also, it will not show any image, it will not form any image, and it will not help in the visualization of any of the picture. So, this region is called as black spot, where you do not find the presence of photoreceptors. Why we cannot see anything when the light falls on the black spot? It is due to the absence of photoreceptors called rods and cones. So, rods and cones are absent at this spot. So, this spot can be termed as yellow spot. The other one is, so this spot is called as the black spot. The other spot is also present in the retina. We call this spot as yellow spot. Yellow spot shows a depression. In this way, it shows a depression, and this depression is called as fovea. Fovea shows the presence of more number of cones. So as the more number of cones are present, we can see any of the picture. If the light falls on this yellow spot or fovea, we can see any of the picture in a clear manner. Very clear picture can be seen if the light directly falls on the depression of a yellow spot called fovea. So these are the different things, different layers and the different parts that you can see in the human eye. So whenever you look at the internal structure of the human eye, you will be finding 3 layers: sclera, choroid layer and retina. Sclera will cover the whole eyeball and the transparent part is found here. We call that transparent part as cornea, and below the cornea, iris is found. Iris shows one hole through which the light enters. The light enters and it will fall on the retina. Okay. So this hole is called as pupil, and choroid layer, it gets attaches with the lens which is present behind the iris. So this lens can have the attachment with that of choroid layer because of the presence of ciliary muscles. And the other layer is our retina, in which you can see the presence of ganglionic cells, bipolar neurons and the photoreceptors like rods and cones. So this is about the structure of our eye. Besides this, you can find the liquid which is present behind the iris. The liquid is found in between the iris and the lens. We call that liquid as aqueous humor. And here in this place, after the layer of the retina, the place which is present in the ball of our eye, that is filled with, the place which is left in the structure of our eye, that is filled with the other fluid which is sticky. And this fluid is called as vitreous fluid or vitreous humor, we can say. So vitreous humor is found in this part of our eye, and in between the iris and lens you can find a liquid that is called as aqueous humor. This is about the structure of the human eye. In the next class, I'll explain you the role of rods and cones as photoreceptors, and also we will see the mechanism of vision. That's all for today. Meet you in next class. Thank you.